From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Thursday edition with the Norwegians in town. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as Norway's Prime Minister arrives at the White House to meet with President Trump with Ukraine on the agenda. Alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington, I'm Mathieu. Thanks for joining us here on the early edition of Balance of Power. Bloomberg now reporting, Kailey, new conditions for peace that the U.S. is putting on Russia we haven't heard about until now.
Yeah, our first real insight into concessions being asked of the Kremlin, which specifically, according to our reporting, is that they would have to accept Ukraine having its own military and defense industry in any kind of peace deal, which would mean Vladimir Putin does not achieve one of his stated objectives of this war, which is the demilitarization of Ukraine. So unclear whether or not he would agree to this. It's probably going to be up to Steve Witkoff to relay this to him when he visits Moscow, expected tomorrow.
That'll be quite a conversation to be a fly on the wall. Those tend to go on for hours based on the meetings that they had. But you're right, in the early stages, before the actual invasion, Vladimir Putin talked about denazification and demilitarization. We're apparently taking these off the table here. The first one wasn't real to begin with, which could be a non-starter for Moscow, just like giving up Crimea would be for Kyiv.
Yep, and Vladimir Zelensky, has made that clear, something President Trump wasn't necessarily happy with. And of course, we expect we may get more conversation around the war in Ukraine this hour, as the press is expected to be let into the Oval Office as President Trump meets with the Prime Minister of Norway, and not just, of course, Norway's Prime Minister, but Finance Minister as well, who happens to be the former Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg.
He spent a little bit of time in that room. We're also asking questions about tariffs still, with some confusion over China. The impact tariffs will have on the lowest served communities in this country. Part of the conversation we're going to have with John Hope Bryant, Operation Hope Chair, CEO and founder, will join us live from Atlanta a bit later on this hour.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to it. First, though, as always, we got to check on the markets, and Charlie Pellet has a look from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Kailey and Joe. We got a lot going on, and with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ are all advancing. The big event coming up after the close of trading could very much set the tone for more tech earnings to come. We'll be hearing from Alphabet, parent of Google. That stock higher right now. Also higher Intel, which reports after the bell as well. Complete coverage on Bloomberg Television and radio. Equity markets pushing higher, with the Dow retaking the 40,000 mark. 40,033 right now on the Dow Industrials. We'll start there, up 426 now, up by 1.1%. S&P up 93, keeping it all in context, up 1.7%. NASDAQ up 372, up by 2.2%. Broad-based rally with the Russell 2000 index up by 1.7%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index ahead of tech earnings, up by 2.1%. Your 10-year 4.30%, with the 2-year 3.79%. Gold up 1.3%, 33.31 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude 62.74 a barrel, up 0.7%, and Bitcoin now lower by 0.3%, 93,373 on Bitcoin. Again, Alphabet and Intel after the close of trading, reacting to earnings last night. We've got IBM shares down 6.8%, and Texas Instruments after earnings surging now by 7%. Lots going on. We got you covered. Back we go to Washington as Balance of Power continues, and your hosts, Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
Lots going on indeed. Charlie Pellet, thank you so much, as always, for keeping an eye on the markets as we're keeping an eye on the White House. We expect that President Trump and the Prime Minister and Finance Minister of Norway will emerge from behind closed doors, head to the Oval Office after their bilateral lunch meeting, and let the press back in for more questions and more answers. Probably a lot of them focused on issues of trade and, of course, the ongoing war in Ukraine. As we already heard at the beginning of their lunch meeting, when press was let in momentarily from President Trump, that he does believe Ukraine and Russia would like to reach a peace deal, but he says they need to get to the table to do that.
They need to get to the table, and it's coming hours after a deadly and just terrifying attack, drone and missile attack against Kyiv last night. Russia claiming 9 lives, more than 60 wounded. And of course, President Zelensky is perplexed by some of the concessions that he's heard about. We're now talking about concessions for Russia. This is the backdrop of this meeting today in the Oval Office that we will witness together coming up a bit later this hour. And it's where we start this hour with Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall on the North Lawn of the White House. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. It appears that President Trump is trying to ramp up the pressure here earlier, saying that he has his own deadline when it comes to when he wants to see Ukraine and Russia agree on a deal. He didn't elaborate further besides saying that he would like to see a deal done fast. Of course, defense cooperation amid the ongoing war is going to be a top discussion today because you mentioned it at the top there. It's not just Norway's prime minister here, but also their finance minister, a familiar name, Jens Stoltenberg, the former NATO secretary general, who President Trump said called him a great friend in the Oval Office earlier. And this meeting comes on the heels of some important Bloomberg News reporting earlier today that the U.S. will demand that Russia accept Ukraine's right to build up its military and its defense industry, which would largely be seen as a concession by Vladimir Putin if Russia does agree, because they have wanted to see Ukraine disarm, as well as see a halt of Western military flows into the country. On the other end of that, though, we are reporting that very likely Ukraine's NATO ambitions are going to be off the table. And I bring that up because there are still some big disagreements here, of course, but particularly among European allies like Norway and the U.S. about the right path forward, because the U.S. has put forward a plan that potentially could mean freezing battle lines where they are, potentially recognizing Crimea as Russian territory. But our allies have said that a few things really need to happen first, including a ceasefire, as well as, recognizing what sort of security guarantees the U.S. could be providing here in order to make sure that a deal could actually end up being long-lasting. So that's one of the big themes that we're waiting to see emerge here today, whether or not Norway can pin the U.S. down when it comes to any sort of firmer security guarantees, besides for the implicit guarantees that they have talked about when it comes to a vested economic interest.
Well, of course, we understand that is one item, top of the agenda probably, Tyler, but the president also said that Norway and the U.S. would be discussing trade. And we heard a little bit from him about trade with China as well, a suggestion that they met today. But Tyler, who's they? He wouldn't say.
Right. No specifics there, particularly after China's Commerce Ministry said this morning that there are no negotiations currently going on between Beijing and Washington, just a day after President Trump had said that everything is active when asked if he was actively involved in talks with China. We do know that there were some preconditions on the table for China to get to the negotiating table, including that somebody other than President Trump needs to be the point person. At the same time, though, yesterday, I'll bring up those comments again, that President Trump said that he feels that 145% levy is very high and amounts to a trade embargo. But at the same time, we're talking about mixed messaging here, as you're about to hear from him yesterday. He said that even if the U.S. doesn't strike a deal with Beijing, that would still be okay.
We're going to have great deals. And by the way, if we don't have a deal with a company or a country, we're going to set the tariff. We just set the tariff. It's something that we think that will happen, I'd say, over the next couple of weeks. Wouldn't you say? I think so. Over the next 2-3 weeks, we'll be setting the number. And we're going to pick, could be for China, too.
President Trump there potentially floating that this White House could release some revised tariff rates for countries, including China, in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're still waiting on further details on what exactly that could be, as we try to glean whether or not negotiations really are taking place and who they are taking place with. One of those countries, though, that the U.S. is negotiating with, we know, of course, is Japan. Joe and Kailey, I'll quickly mention some other important Bloomberg News reporting this morning that Japan says that it will push back on the U.S. if they ask them to curb their own trade with China. We should be clear, Japanese officials tell Bloomberg News the U.S. has not asked that quite yet, but we do know it's an option that the administration is thinking about.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, live at the North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio as we await, again this hour, expect to hear more from President Trump and the Prime Minister of Norway in the Oval Office on the issue of the war in Ukraine, but also on tariffs as well. And this comes, Joe, as we've gotten some fresh polling data out of all places, Fox News. Yeah. On how Americans are feeling about the president's handling of tariffs and the economy overall. And on both metrics, he is underwater by a pretty wide margin. Tariff approval, disapproval, 58% disapprove of tariffs, only 33% approve of his
We are
policies.
looking at broadly the lowest approval ratings of a president in the first 100 days in modern history, which has prompted Donald Trump to get to Truth Social and call on Rupert Murdoch to fire the pollster at Fox News. I'm not sure that's going to happen. He's asking for the same at the Wall Street Journal. But of course, it brings us to the issue of tariffs, the corrosive effect that it's had on psychology in the markets, although we are feeling a little better about things today. And the corrosive impact it's had in the psyche of many consumers who are concerned about rising prices and where we're going to be in the second half of the year. Kailey, every day we talk about economists raising odds for a recession in the second half.
Yeah, and it seems that those concerns are reflected when you're looking at more marginalized communities in terms of their financial health. According to a new survey from Hope Insider survey from the Operation Hope project, 3 of 4 participants in the survey said they are not confident that the economy will remain stable. 53% believe the change in administration will not increase job growth in their communities.
Sensing a bit of a theme here. With that in mind, we're excited to introduce John Hope Bryant, bring back to Bloomberg, the chairman, CEO, founder of Operation Hope. He's with us live from our bureau in Atlanta. John, it's great to have you with us here on Bloomberg, and I appreciate your coming to talk to us. You actually were in the Treasury Department recently to talk about financial literacy, which I know is a matter of great import to you. You spent some time with Scott Besson, who tweeted a photo of you together and wrote, "Financial literacy is a necessity, not a luxury." Is the word tariff in the financial literacy notebook that you're bringing forth?
Well, I believe that, first of all, honored to be with you. Thanks for having me. I believe that financial literacy is the civil rights issue of this generation, and the color's not black or white or red or blue. It's green. It affects all of us, and based on your reporting you just had, even more so now because the economy is basically driven, the biggest economy in the world, driven by consumer spending, over 70%, and everybody's starting to feel the pinch now. No, tariffs is not typically part of the financial literacy lexicon. I do understand that a president might want to use it as a negotiating tool in the short term to try to get someone to level a playing field with regard to trade, trade imbalances, et cetera. As a long-term tool, I think for a country that runs on sentiment, it runs on how do I feel about things, and again, the economy is mostly consumer spending. As a long-term instrument, I don't think it's productive. I actually think it's potentially harmful. I'm hopeful that this is not a long-term strategy. The 90-day pause was a nice thing to see. I think you saw the markets respond to that. You know, when you say tariffs to my population, they're thinking about bread prices, egg prices, kitchen top economics, gas prices. You know, how's it going to affect the restaurant? How's it going to affect the part, you know, the car they're buying or the TV that they're buying, because a lot of this stuff has parts from all around the world, and they're smart enough at least to understand that if there's a tax on that, which is what a tariff is, that the importer is going to have to potentially raise those prices if it lasts for a period of time. I do have confidence in Secretary Scott Bessent, though. I do have enormous confidence in him, and I think that he will find a way with the administration to maneuver us forward.
So if you think the Treasury Secretary is the adult in the room, and there's been much reporting about his role in implementing or having the president implement that 90-day pause, perhaps pulling him back from the ledge on firing the chair of the Federal Reserve, what has he shared with you? Has he given you any insight into the administration's thinking, what he's receiving back when he brings forward those messages?
You know, I spent over an hour with the Secretary, and it was a very serious meeting, and he took the issue very seriously, rightly so. I've known 12 secretaries of the Treasury, 9 U.S. presidents. We've been recognized by 5. I've served 3 from both parties. This is the most serious conversation that I can recall ever having with the Secretary of the Treasury on this issue of financial literacy. We covered a lot of ground. I'm going to answer your question directly. But I intentionally did not cover tariffs with him because I knew that the president has had this on his mind since 1980. He's been talking about this since 1980. He's going to do it one way or another. Why put the secretary in a position where he can't answer a question, or it's a question that can't be answered? So let's, you know, it is what it is. Let that go forward. There are a lot of other things that we have more control over, and that's going to, again, play itself out the way it plays itself out. The things that I did engage him on, he was completely transparent about. He wanted to have constructive criticism, a critique. He wanted to know how policies were affecting the average citizen. He wanted feedback on that on a regular basis. He understood that this is a nonpartisan issue, that you need This can't be something that gets put into some partisan discussion where only one group supports it. That it will fail that way. You need Republicans and Democrats, blacks and whites, rich and poor, urban and rural. You need my population that I represent, we're the largest in the country, to embrace something that makes sense from the administration. So he's very smart, I think, to ask a group that has 1,500 offices in the country and a pulse on what's going on for not only just help with the program side, and maybe we give him some policy recommendations he might like, he's invited those, but also to help at the right time to get, this really could be a unifying issue for the country. And at a time where everybody argues over, is it dark outside? Is it light out? Is that really light? No, it's not light. Somebody's lying to me, right? You know, I mean, you can't. Somebody says something's up. Somebody says no, that's down, right? Everybody's like in the business of arguing, and I think people are exhausted by it. By the way, isn't it nice that there's a topic that actually most people agree on? And I think he thinks financial literacy could be that issue that is a unifier. Now, we got to get all the noise out the way, the political noise and the partisanship out the way. I mean, people saw me meeting for the administration from, you call it my community, and folks start coming at me with that. And I said, look, trust me, sit down for a minute. I've known this guy for a decade. He's a good man. And just trust me, I think there's something we can do here that's good for everybody. And they said, great. Well, that has to happen. Everybody has to say, this is a radical movement of common sense. This is something we can agree on. This is something we can get done, and let's work on it. And that's his view, and it was very refreshing, actually. I didn't feel uncomfortable in any part of the meeting. He was himself, which is direct and transparent, and he was squarely focused on this issue, but he also understood that financial literacy ripples out into the broader economy. In other words, he wasn't treating this like some trinket issue or some marginal issue. Yeah.
Well, he referred to you as a longtime friend in his post supporting this idea on Financial Literacy Month. And we appreciate your bringing us inside that conversation, John, because, you know, the president's surrounded by a lot of different people who have a lot of different ideas about all of these things. And there were some pretty ugly tweets that we saw. Posts on X from the likes of Laura Loomer referred to you as a pro-impeachment Trump hater. Even Elon Musk retweeted that, calling it troubling. And I'm wondering if you have any reaction to what you heard there, or if that might impact your relationship with this administration.
I mean, what I believe is that the election's over, and he's the president of the United States. And as I've said on multiple TV interviews and black urban radio interviews, if the president succeeds, we succeed. If the president fails, we fail. What's complicated about this? Nobody should be rooting for his failure. We should be trying to help him succeed. Which is exactly why I risked, pushback from my traditional community to go and have this meeting, which I thought was important on the first day of Financial Literacy Month. And luckily, I'm getting very proud of the black and brown community. They're very mature about it. They were like, yeah, it's not about black or brown, John, as you said. It's about the green, right? It's not, so go get us some green. Let's see what we get. And Dr. King was assassinated 57 years ago this month, and we were in Memphis for that with Republicans, by the way, and Democrats, and members of the Trump administration with us. And for 3 hours, nobody said anything negative about anybody. I banned it. No hating, no arguing, no nothing. And it was about solutions and the business plan for America. And of course, Dr. King died trying to help poor whites, which is the largest population of poverty in this country then and today. And we have a business plan we created for rural America, where a lot of poor whites live. We have a business plan for black Americans and for women and for Latinos and for Asians and for Native American Indians. And it's all published. It's all transparent. You can download it. Most people have read it and go, wow, it actually makes some sense. I like this. There's something for me here. We've got to get back to that conversation, because the Bible says a house divided cannot stand. We keep on with this ridiculousness, ladies and gentlemen, and we want to worry about whether we're hating on each other, because everybody wants to be an American but Americans. We'll be speaking Mandarin in 20 years, because there are other countries that want to be us. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea want our way of life. They want what we have. They can't get it in a fair fight. They can only get it if we mess it up. And we got to figure out whether we're better together. That's what Dr. King believed. That's what I believe. So, what does like have to do with it? I mean, this has to do with do we, I really respect me and learn to like me, that like me never respect me, right? And do we respect each other? Because, by the way, we need different views. This country is made up. On the way in here, I heard from my people that California, which went from the 5th largest economy in the world to the 4th largest economy, ahead of Japan, right? Well, California, I believe, is the most diverse place in the United States of America. And New York, I believe you guys are in New York, is the second most biggest economy, right, in the U.S. And it also is one of the most diverse places. So diversity wins. Diversity wins. And by the way, most people are immigrants, including my European friends. And of course, black folks got on the wrong boat. That's another conversation. Look, we gotta lighten the temperature, and laser in the focus on what we are really about. What's the business plan for this country? And how can we, again, this is the biggest economy in the world, and it's 70% consumer spending. That's all of us doing better.
Well, and to return to the point you were just making on everybody wants to be the United States of America, I wonder what you make of the narrative that has been working its way through financial market participants in the last month or two about the end of U.S. exceptionalism. Is that the way you see it? Is that what these policies could bring about?
I think every 50 to 70, maybe certainly 100 years, this country has an identity crisis. We had it with the first Reconstruction, which was, of course, we had it with the war for our independence. But then you had the first Reconstruction, which was slavery, right? That was a decision. By the way, the Republican Party, people don't know, was birthed on freedom and anti-slavery agenda. I don't know if people know that. That was why Lincoln got so much heck. But that was the first Reconstruction. And then you had Frederick Douglass, a black man, working with Abraham Lincoln, a white man and Frederick Douglass criticized Abraham Lincoln. But Lincoln was smart enough to recognize of stuff he didn't know, as smart as he was, and he brought Frederick Douglass into the conversation. At the end of the day, Frederick Douglass made him a better president. His council made him a better president. That constructive friction, Lincoln realized, was a good thing, not just negative friction, constructive friction. Then we had the second Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement. And President Johnson, who happened to be a Democrat, did not did not get along with Dr. King. Dr. King got along with pretty much everybody. But they figured out they were better together. They ended up with 4 civil rights bills by a guy who called people really interesting names. I'm talking about Johnson. And then you had the third Reconstruction, which is what I think we're in today, 2020 to 2030. And so I'm not surprised that the country's basically going through a colonic. I mean, this is one huge digestive exercise where we got to flush a lot of things through our system, and we got to figure out, right? Can you survive hard right, and that's it? Can you survive hard left, and that's it? I don't think so. I think most people are actually massively in the middle. It's a radical movement of common sense. They want to pay their mortgage. They want to send their kid to college, right? They want to start a business or go work for one. They want to go to the park with their kids. They want to enjoy their neighbors. The diversity actually is part of our magic sauce. It's just that the diversity is a little darker these days. It's a little bit more tan. But the diversity is all. Do you know that women, in 1972, a woman could not get a bank account? Not 1872. In the second Reconstruction, affirmative action, which was created for blacks, actually went to benefit white women. And I say, bravo, by the way. Today, women couldn't get a loan unless her husband guaranteed it in 1972. Today, women are a third of the U.S. economy. If we hadn't done that, if we hadn't had that debate and won it with common sense, where would we be today? A third of all women, I think it's like $7 trillion is the women's contribution to GDP. We'd be an also-ran country. We'd be a third world country as economically. Here we go again. Half of this country, 40% of this country is black and brown. I love math because it doesn't have an opinion. Within 10 years, there'll be a majority of minorities. The largest group of baby boomers in the history are beginning to retire. As you know, there's going to be $100 trillion wealth transfer in the next 10 or 20 years. That's basically white, wealthy people trying to go play golf at the same time. The businesses, who's going to buy them? The GDP, who's going to replace them? My rich friends need my poor friends to do better. if only to stay rich. And so this is what I told the secretary, is you can't, well, I'm sorry, I didn't tell the secretary this part. I told TV this part. You can't cut yourself alone out of this crisis. Yes, there is waste. There is bloating. Let's get to that in an intelligent way, not in a, the how is as important as the what. We can be gracious about this. We can understand it's not the employee's fault if they're working at an agency that may not be efficient. Let's deal with that in an intelligent way. Get that out of the way. Now let's at the bottom third of the economy and make them capitalists. And let them, let's repair the ladder and let them become homeowners. 44% of black people own a home compared to 75% of their white counterparts. That's good for banks, for them to get financially literate, right? Then get their credit score up. By the way, credit score increases of 100 points in Black America alone is worth $750 billion by 2053. Then you go buy homes, 44% to 60% home ownership for Black America alone. That's good for $800 billion. That's $1.5 trillion of wealth creation and 2 to 3% of GDP increases every year. And then you have business acquisition. The baby boomers don't want the businesses. The baby boomers are retiring. They want to give away the stocks, bonds, the cash, all that stuff in the homes. The family wants that. The family don't want the businesses. Well, let somebody buy that business. That's $1 trillion of wealth creation. And AI, artificial intelligence. I'm co-chair with Sam Altman on the AI Ethics Council, and I'm co-chair with Doug McMillan of Walmart on financial literacy for all. This is civil rights and civil rights. These two things, that's $1 trillion. So that's $3.5 trillion of new wealth creation by 2053, 20 years or so. Yeah. And 2 to 3% of additional GDP. Who doesn't want that? I mean, when the black person succeeds in this example, or the poor rural white, or the woman, or the Latino, or the Asian, yes, here legally, when they succeed, all boats rise. This is a radical movement of common sense. I just think that no one's really having this conversation, but this is the conversation. And
that's why we wanted you to be here, John. If we just let you keep talking, I feel like you're going to solve this for us right now in this hour. You know, there are very few people who come on Bloomberg and we clear the decks for like this. At some point, we are going to check the markets. But while you're still with us, live from Atlanta here, you know, there's the old saying, if you're getting it on both sides, you're doing something right. And I suspect that you feel like that right now. Would you go back to meet with this Treasury Secretary again?
If he invites me, I'll come back, sure. I mean, I was there meeting with other folks a couple weeks, last week actually. I mean, look, I'm going to give him some room and let him do his job. He's helping to run the world economy. He knows my number. If he wants to call me, I'll answer. But you know, let him have some room. Let him talk to some other people. Let him, you know, look, we have the largest infrastructure for financial literacy coaching in America. We're not going anywhere. And we're the best in class, and we're in urban communities. 20% of our offices are in white, poor, rural communities, by the way. And they don't care what color I am. They just care whether they're getting their earned income tax credit, their credit score up, their debt down, their savings up, and the bank says yes to an approval. And so we have this infrastructure that's growing, 1,500 offices total, millions of clients, and we're here when the Secretary of the Treasury, and by extension the administration, has some make sense things they'd like to do that we can be helpful for. And if they don't need us, we'll go on about our business.
All right, we'll leave it on that note. John, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. John Hope Bryant, Operation Hope, Inc., Chair, CEO, and founder here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Much appreciated. And as he says, the Treasury Secretary needs to get out and talk to more people. He currently is in the room in the White House, along with other cabinet secretaries and President Trump and the Prime Minister and Finance Minister of Norway. We again expect that they will emerge from that meeting in short order. When they do so in the Oval Office, we'll be bringing it to you live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. But before we do so, as Joe said, we do got to get back to the markets. So Charlie Pellet, how are we looking from New York?
Right now, we are looking at a Dow Jones Industrial Average that is hovering right around the 40,000 threshold, up 390 right now. That is a gain of 1%. Dow Industrials at 39,995. A couple of moments ago, it was moving above 40,000. The S&P up 92, up by 1.7%. And NASDAQ now higher by 382 points. NASDAQ is up 2.3%. The Russell 2000 index of small small cap shares up 1.7%. Your 10-year 4.31% with the 2-year currently yielding 3.79%. Gold up $46 the ounce, $33.35 the ounce, up 1.4%. And West Texas Intermediate crude very close to $63 a barrel now, up by 1.1%. PepsiCo has lowered its full-year profit outlook, showing that demand for the company's snacks and soft drinks is wobbling amid unpredictable U.S. trade policy and worsening consumer sentiment. PepsiCo shares on an up day for the rest of the market. PepsiCo down now by 5.3%. And Procter & Gamble is cutting its annual sales and profit outlook, citing tariffs and volatility in consumer demand. Procter & Gamble down by 4.6%. Our last guest alluded to it. California's nominal gross domestic product reached $4.1 trillion last year, making it the world's fourth largest economy. Governor Newsom using his state's economic power to challenge President Trump's trade policies. Recapping, S&P right now up by 92. That is a gain of 1.7%. Back we go to Washington. Balance of Power continues. Once again, your hosts, Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Charlie Pellet on the markets for us every day here on the fastest show in politics. Thanks for being with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio, on YouTube as well. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. You can always find us, of course, on satellite radio channel 121. A lot of ways to find Balance of Power, including our podcast, which you can find at Apple and Spotify. We're in waiting mode right now for President Trump and the Prime Minister of Norway. Behind closed doors, they're having lunch right now, and they will have a bilateral meeting in the Oval Office that we're told will be a fly on the wall for. It was supposed to start about 30 minutes ago, and so we're running a little bit late here. They did spend a bit of time in front of reporters earlier. When the Prime Minister arrived ahead of their lunch, reporters in the room asking questions about Ukraine. This is going to be a major part of the conversation today, the path to peace, if there is one. Only hours after Russia delivered one of its largest missile and drone attacks in recent memory against Kyiv. The president was asked about deadlines for peace. Here's what he said.
I have my own deadline. And we want it to be fast. And the Prime Minister is helping us. He wants it to be fast, too. And I think everybody in this, at this time in NATO, they want to see this thing happen. So we have a deadline. And after that, we're going to have a very much different attitude. But I think that has a very good chance of getting done.
Remembering that the first deadline we had heard about when it came to ending the war between Ukraine and Russia was day one of President Trump's presidency. That's what he said he could achieve, or perhaps even before he would come into office, he thought he could end this war, which is still ongoing. So on that note, we turn to our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. Rick, of course, Stonecourt Capital partner and Republican strategist. Jeanne, Democratic analyst and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And Rick, when we consider that this president, this White House, their communications team has made a big hay about promises made, promises kept, do you hear from President Trump and others in his administration who are working on this issue a suggestion that this might actually be a promise that is not going to be as easy to keep as they thought?
Yeah, I think anytime they enter into the debate on how long is it going to take to get a deal with Vladimir Putin, they're running on very thin ice. Obviously, he was thinking that the power of his personality, the strength of the Union of America and NATO, would be enough of an influence to get something done quickly. But I don't think he's ever really quite understood how intransient Vladimir Putin is, and all the kind of nice things that he says about him and tries to blame the war on the Ukrainians isn't going to convince Vladimir Putin to do something he otherwise doesn't want to do. And so I think, we're 100 days and counting. Yesterday, the vice president was talking about, if we're not going to settle this thing soon, we're walking away. I saw the president's comments as a way of walking back that a little bit today, not trying to create too much heated rhetoric at a time when Putin is still making these really untoward attacks on the Ukrainians. So, look, I think he's in the middle of a mess, and it's going to take him a lot longer to try and figure out. We may be here another 100 days wondering, hey, he promised 100 days in to his administration that he was going to end this thing soon, and still no answer.
Wow. Well, it's at least 9 dead and 60 wounded in this overnight missile and drone attack in Kyiv. Jeanne, we talked to Ben Jensen at CSIS earlier today, who said attacks like these will only increase as we get closer to any potential peace as Vladimir Putin tries to strengthen his hand militarily. And you see Donald Trump on Truth Social today. I'm not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv, he writes. Not necessary and very bad timing. Vladimir, stop! Exclamation point. Is he learning a very difficult lesson, to Rick's point here, about Vladimir Putin?
You know, I thought I'm so glad you raised that post, because I think it's a moment that we're going to remember, this sort of personal appeal from the president, Vladimir, stop. And this is not necessary. And 70 missiles, 150 attack drones, including ballistic missiles, targeting citizens and civilians in Kyiv. As they are at the table to have these talks. I don't know if Donald Trump is learning. He has said things in just the last few days and few hours, things that make you scratch your head, like blaming Barack Obama for Crimea, for instance, something he said as early as 2018, but has reiterated in the last few days, few hours. But the reality is that we aren't really much closer to a ceasefire than we were when he took office. And this is not on Donald Trump beyond the promise he made. This is a result of the fact that this is very, very hard negotiations. And so his overpromising on the campaign trail is now coming back to haunt him. And we can feel his frustration. And of course, we all feel that along with him.
Well, and I wonder what those in the Norwegian delegation, including the prime minister and the former NATO secretary general, now finance minister of Norway, Jens Stoltenberg, will be feeling as they're having their conversation with the president now. It will turn public in short order. Again, we'll bring that to you live here on Bloomberg TV and radio when it begins. But Jeanne, given what we saw in the Oval Office when Ukrainian President Zelensky visited, how quickly that went downhill, how careful do leaders in Europe of alliances that the U.S. has at least historically held very close have to be when navigating this issue with President Trump? Is there a way for them to be able to convey their concerns without it potentially jeopardizing their own relationships with this country?
Yeah, I think they probably are taking a lesson from the Prime Minister of Great Britain and the Prime Minister of France, who were able to negotiate those visits very well. Of course, you never know what to expect when they open up that White House and we go in via the press and listen to these comments. But, Donald Trump does have a long relationship with Stoltenberg. They do have two huge issues on their plates between tariff and the Ukraine issue. But, the hope is that they are able to convey to him the concern as a country that is right on the border. And of course, the import of us being in alliance with NATO and supporting Ukraine, and the very real concern of Poland, Norway, and these other countries, that it is in the interest of not just them sitting there on the border, but the United States and all of the democratic Western world, that we do stop these kinds of incursions and we don't by any means support Vladimir Putin in this invasion and open the door to other tyrants doing the same thing if we turn our backs on them.
Rick, we're hearing for the first time today, at least in any specific way, about concessions for Russia that the U.S. is proposing here, that Russia accept Ukraine's right to have its own army and defense industry. That's said to be a non-starter in Moscow. If we've got this on one side and Zelensky's saying, I'm not giving up Crimea on the other, this is a standoff, right? This is a deadlock.
Yeah, it indicates to me that we really haven't made any progress, that unless Vladimir Putin is prepared to give, right, not his maximalist principles of everything should be given to me to stop killing people, right? I mean, that is his concept of a peace agreement. And that the people of Ukraine, will never, say yes to that. They are a sovereign territory that was illegally invaded by the Russian army, and they're fighting for their survival, and they expect the Russians to withdraw from their sovereign territory. I mean, like, as a basis of a conversation, you have to go back to saying, where are the lines that have, been drawn in this arena? And by the way, I mean, Russia has agreed to that. In earlier agreements, when the Ukrainians gave up their nuclear weapons, Russia agreed to the sovereignty of Ukraine. And so it's certainly within their right and within the treaty agreement they have insist on that. The idea that they somehow are going to, neutralize the Ukrainian ability to defend itself and insist that they can't join NATO and insist that you can't put European troops in the country is not a realistic basis for a negotiation.
Well, and to return to what you were saying earlier, the suggestions we got, not just from J.D. Vance, but Marco Rubio, that the U.S. is prepared to walk away. What would it actually mean, do you think, Rick, if the U.S. weren't the one mediating these talks? If it was another country, take your pick, if all it is about being a middleman between Ukraine and Russia, does the U.S. really need to be involved, or is the U.S. involvement the only hope of ever bringing an end to this conflict?
No, I'd say at this stage, I would make the bold, blatant statement that the U.S. is an impediment to getting a deal done because we've been coddling Vladimir Putin, and no one else in the world will do that, right? If the Europeans get involved in a negotiation for this, they will say, get out of Ukraine first and foremost. And the last thing they want is to reward a bully for invading another country, one that they live right next to. And so the U.S. is the best chance, because of Vladimir Putin's seemingly adoration of Vladimir Putin, for Vladimir Putin to get a deal that he could actually agree to. And so maybe the U.S. getting out of the middle of this thing will result in some clarity on where the real bounds of a deal can be made.
Well, so is that where we're going here, Jeanne? We've heard multiple threats from the president himself, from the vice president, from the secretary of state. Take it or leave it. Otherwise, we're packing up our toys and leaving. Would that actually be the beginning of a real negotiation?
It might be, but I think that speaks volumes as to the United States position in the world if that's what happens. I mean, it's stunning for me to listen to Marco Rubio, who just months ago was voting to support Ukraine, to talk about walking away. And what does that say about the United States' place in the world and as the leading democracy in the world, that we would pack up and go home because an invaded country did not agree to give up territory to the invader? I mean, to me, that should be a dismal reality for every American. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope it's an empty threat on behalf of the administration and they continue to fight for Ukraine to maintain its sovereignty and work out a deal between these two, because they could get one.
Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, our political panel, as we wait to hear from President Trump and the Prime Minister of Norway. Things must be going well in their meeting over lunch, because they have not begun their bilateral session yet. That was supposed to start more than a half hour ago. When it does, you'll see it and hear it here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington, alongside Kailey Leinz, as we drive on with our view on the stock market, Wall Street now, and Charlie Pellet with his update in New York. Charlie, how are we doing?
Thank you very much. Right now, we are hovering right around the 40,000 mark on the Dow. Going to be a big day for tech names after the close of trading today, when we hear from both Alphabet and Intel. Yes, Bloomberg Television and radio, we got you absolutely, positively, completely covered on both those names. Right now, the S&P is up 87, 54.63, up by about 1.6%. The Dow, as I mentioned, right around 40,000, up 377 now, up by about 1%. NASDAQ up 361, up by 2.2%, while the NASDAQ 100 index up by 2.3%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up 1.6%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index ahead of tech earnings up 2.1%. Spot gold right now trading higher by 1.4%, 33.33 the ounce. The 10-year 4.30% with the 2-year 3.79%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1%, 62.86 per barrel of WTI. Bitcoin right now at 92,995. Bitcoin down $690. Bitcoin is declining by 0.7%. Bottom line here, investors are betting that the Fed could cut rates sooner than anticipated to prevent a recession due to President Trump's trade war. Company news, Bristol-Myers Squibb raising its sales and profit forecast for the year due to better than expected sales of older drugs and a favorable impact from the weaker dollar. BMY, Bristol-Myers down 0.4%. And Merck says it expects to lose $200 million to already announced tariffs in 2025 amid an escalating trade war between the U.S. and China. Recapping, S&P up 88 right now, up 1.6%. Balance of power continues now. And back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Charlie Pellet, looking at the markets for us. Thank you so much as we consider markets, which it's incredible to see 3 up days in a row, something we haven't seen for the S&P 500 at least since before Liberation Day, as it has keyed off of every single development and headline in regard to tariffs. And we certainly have not seen those headlines stopping today when it comes to not just tariffs, but negotiations to maybe make them go away. We've had a lot of questions, Joe, about the tariff or trade negotiations and whether or not they'd be opening up anytime soon between the U.S. and China. President Trump in the Oval Office last night suggested that there's talks happening every day. China itself pushed back on that overnight, saying no such talks have begun. And President Trump doubled down just an hour ago when he let the press in his meeting with the Norwegian Prime Minister, saying that they had a meeting today, but that whoever they was is not important. So once again, we're being left with questions as to what exactly, if any, progress has been made on reducing what is 145% and 125% levies, respectively.
Doesn't sound like the principals are in the same room. As the president has said, we're waiting for the call. So based on everything we understand, no call has been made. Whether there's some sort of back channeling going on he might be presumably referring to, we have no idea.
Yeah, and it's that lack of clarity that, of course, we keep hearing from Federal Reserve officials about as they try to consider what impact tariff policies ultimately are going to have on their policy making. And on that note, Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller had some thoughts on the subject when he joined our colleague Michael McKee here in Washington earlier today. Here's a taste of their conversation.
The president's put off any decision on the large tariff world that was proposed on April 2nd until July. So all you're going to see probably till July is whatever the existing tariffs are in place. And as I said, I don't think you're going to see enough happen in the real data in the next couple of months.
The aforementioned Michael McKee is with us right now at the table in Washington, spending the week with us here for the spring meetings at the IMF, which means you're having a lot of really interesting conversations, popping around town and hearing things that a lot of people might not have planned to say on the air. I'm just wondering if you can bring us into some of those conversations. Is uncertainty the word that you're hearing about, or is it a more nuanced conversation around tariffs?
Well, it's really uncertainty. The people who are experts in trade and tariff are saying the obvious things, that this is not good for the country, and whatever path we take, if you're going to have tariffs, it's a tax and it's not good for the economy. But what the impact is going to be is much harder for anybody to divine, because they don't know what the ultimate tariffs are going to be and what products they're going to be on and how that's going to impact everybody. You heard Chris Waller say, we've seen the soft data go down, but I was asking him how the hard data, when do we get some hard data that will tell us one way or another? And he said you probably won't see it till July. So we're going to be living in this sort of weightless world for quite some time.
Well, it's also a question of, even when that hard data materializes, which portions of the hard data the Fed chooses to be most reactive to. Is it anything that indicates cost pressures and inflation is going up, or is it softness in the labor market? They got to pick a side of the mandate here, right?
Well, his view was maybe not. You might see both at the same time. The theory enunciated by Jay Powell is that they'll look at which one of those is farther from where it should be and try to deal with that. Inflation is always their major concern. So if we do see inflation go up, now Waller differs from Powell a little bit in saying that he thinks that growth is a greater danger in the tariff scenario than inflation. Inflation would be a one-time jump in the price matter, whereas Powell said it could last for a while. So we'll have to see how that data plays out. The other thing people are talking about, though, is how this affects the rest of the world. Certainly, everybody we've had in here, and we've had a lot of finance ministers and central bankers from around the world this week, is saying that this is going to affect us. And then there is a rebound effect on our relationship with the United States. And last night, we were at an event where we heard people say it goes beyond economics to national security, because if you can't count on the United States economically, can you count on them with national security? We have to take care of ourselves.
We're going to witness a confluence of these two issues in a couple of moments. The press pool is staged outside the Oval Office right now, and we're going to see President Trump and the Prime Minister of Norway really get to this. They're talking about tariffs. They're also talking about national security and how to end the war in Ukraine. Ukraine. When you're talking about the market listening to this conversation, though, to what extent does the market have patience for each wrinkle? You know, we sit here obsessing over this, carrying all of these events live every day, Michael, and it's hard to tell how much of this lands and is actually being digested by the market or by an economist who sees news here that changes the landscape.
Well, I think the economists and the analysts are reacting sort of in real time. We've seen a lot of the Wall Street analysts changing their forecasts and sending out updates. I'm not sure that investors are really as focused. I mean, first you have to discount the fact that there are a whole bunch of computers trading on headlines that cross on the Bloomberg, and they don't know whether Trump means it or not. Then there is a question about whether this is going to be like Trump 1, where things get walked back. And we've seen some evidence of things getting walked back. And then how much damage is it going to be done, and can it be fixed later on? And nobody knows the answer to that. I do find it amusing every day to watch the equity market go up or down on some headline. The fact that yesterday Scott Bessent said, we could make a deal with China. Well, yeah, but that sent the market up a lot.
Yes,
and then
it did.
Overnight, the Chinese said, well, we haven't called them. And then that sent the market this morning down a whole lot. So it's really hard to put a finger on what everybody's thinking.
Well, especially if you read the story rather than just the Bessent headline, you would see that he actually said a comprehensive trade deal with China could take 2 to 3 years.
That's right.
The idea that none of this, frankly, Mike, is seeming like it's going to be instantaneous.
Well, that's true of anything. I mean, these trade agreements take years to do. Just to do the USMCA took a whole year.
Yeah.
And that changed that treaty very, very little. So to get something out of it that would benefit the United States, benefit both sides, would take some real work. And each country is going to have different trade issues. I read something today about the administration hoping they can reach a deal with India that would be a template. But it's not really a template, because what India wants to put tariffs on or take tariffs off on is not going to be the same as what Japan does. And so it's going to be very difficult. And each of these leaders, each of these countries has their own constituency. The Japanese, their biggest tariff is on imported rice. The rice farmers are not going to be very happy if the prime minister negotiates away the tariff that's put on there. And that's just one example in one country. This is however many countries. They say 90, 20, they give us a different number every day.
I think the press secretary actually suggested hundreds have
Yeah,
called.
I'm still trying to count that many.
I didn't know there were that many.
But I didn't
hundreds
either.
plural.
So, all right, all of that said here, let's say the tariffs went away tomorrow. Donald Trump has a revelation at lunch, and we're just going to walk away from this whole thing. Do we go back to where we were? Is there kind of a neutral position that we revert to? Or has there been a corrosive, lasting impact when it comes to trust, as you pointed out, for the economy or security?
I think there might have been on the business side. Consumers tend to just roll with the punches, and if all of a sudden the idea that they might lose their jobs goes away, if they don't see prices continuously going up at the grocery store, then they may continue on their way, because the economy was in pretty good shape coming into this year. But business has to grapple with the idea that Trump did all this, walked back some, put some back on. So even if he takes it all off again, they've got to worry about whether he's going to change his mind again. And if you're making big investments, those are take place over a period of time. And you don't want to make an investment and then have the president change his mind again. So it does look like he's probably done himself and the country some damage that would be very hard to get over. Eventually, maybe you'd believe him, but do you want to build a new factory if you don't know what the situation's going to be?
Well, and to that credibility question, which I think has extended well beyond just when it comes to rhetoric and tariffs, but there's been major questions raised in recent weeks about the credibility or the security that U.S. assets may even still be able to provide investors, whether full faith and credit for U.S. treasuries is something that is still applicable. Are you hearing about that this week from these other countries who might be holders of this debt?
Less this week. Part of the problem is there is no real substitute. The U.S. Treasury market is the most liquid and deep market in the world, and you don't have a lot of alternatives. People can't switch en masse to another country. The German market, the French market, they're not big enough. China doesn't have a convertible market. So you're really looking at buying American. Maybe you buy less, maybe you spread out your purchases, but people will still buy treasuries. as the old saying goes, they will always clear, but at what price? Now, that's the issue. Do we see interest rates rise to attract that investment? And then that feeds into the whole question of our budget deficit, which is a separate issue that a lot of people you do hear about talking about, that interest rates are going to have to rise to, even without the trade issue, just to get people to buy, which makes the budget deficit worse.
More expensive.
So this is an issue that will be on the table for quite some time, because even without trade, you've got reconciliation in the whole budget process, and they've got to figure out how to pay for the tax cuts and everything else.
Scott Bessent being described as the grown-up, the adult in the room, so forth. You spent time with Scott Bessent before he was the Treasury Secretary. You spent time with Howard Lutnick as well. I just wonder, when you pull back here and look at a more sort of a relieved market in the last 48, 72 hours here, how much of it has to do with specific headlines versus the idea that Scott Bessent has won the battle of who gets Donald Trump's ear?
Well, I don't think you can say that anybody is seriously trading on the idea of Scott Bessent winning the battle, because that can change in a moment's notice.
Fine.
We know that the president could come out at this lunch and say something against Scott. And so I think the relief is that more bad things haven't happened. And while they're still out there, they're still out there. They're not maybe as imminent as they were. So we're going to trade in the meantime. But all of this could come back the same way very quickly.
Yeah. All right, Michael McKee, Bloomberg International Economics and Policy Correspondent, here with Washington on a busy IMF World Bank week-long extravaganza.